Mr Smyth, Cathy Newman from Channel 4 News. We're told that you beat young men until they bled. Why did you do that?
I'm not talking about that.
7 years ago, this programme revealed that John Smyth, a senior barrister and friend of the Archbishop of Canterbury, had groomed boys and young men at Christian summer camps, universities and Winchester College before savagely beating them in a specially constructed shed.
He made me strip off my clothes and he got out a cane and started to beat me.
7 days ago, survivors of Smyth's abuse were sent an official review ordered by Lambeth Palace after our investigation. The report by former Social Services Director Keith Macon described Smyth as the church's most prolific serial abuser, operating in 3 different countries. It accused the church of a cover-up and its most senior leaders of failing to intervene. The Archbishop of Canterbury told me here last week that he'd considered quitting over what he described as his own really shaming failure to do enough to stop Smyth's appalling abuse. Smyth's victims had already told us they wanted Justin Welby to resign. Now senior members of the General Synod, the highest governing body of the Church of England, are calling for him to go too. The Reverend Robert Thompson is among 3 General Synod members to have started a petition urging Justin Welby to resign.
Justin needs to resign because actually the extent of the abuse that was revealed in the Macon report is so much worse than many of us had actually thought. And also the extent of the history of people knowing within particular constituencies within the church. And when Macon says that it's unlikely that Justin didn't know about some of these things way back in the 1980s, I think that is the significant part of the Macon report.
Justin Welby was first warned in general terms about Smyth in 1981. They exchanged Christmas cards, and the Archbishop even helped fund Smyth's ministry in Zimbabwe. He insists he knew no more until 2013, when John Smyth was in South Africa. At that point, Justin Welby was informed the Bishop of Ely had written to a bishop in Cape Town, detailing the seriousness of Smyth's abuse. Here's what the Archbishop said in an exclusive interview with me last week.
And I take responsibility for this, and it was a failure and a really shaming failure. I did not ensure that this was pursued as energetically, as remorselessly as it should have been.
But back in 2019, he told this programme something very different.
I genuinely had no idea that there was anything as horrific as this going on.
The Macon Review described that as one of several incorrect assertions. Was it a lie because the victims say it was?
No, it wasn't. I don't lie on interviews. If I can't tell the truth, I don't answer the question, and I say I'm not going to answer the question.
Did you not think, when you saw that man's name, did you think, oh, I shared a dormitory with him, I exchanged Christmas cards with him, I funded his mission? Did you not think, I must make sure and do everything I personally can to ensure that no other victims in South Africa suffer what all those poor victims suffered in the UK and then Zimbabwe?
We were straining every sinew to try and cope with this flood of cases. But on this one, I didn't do enough, and Macon quite rightly points to that.
Justin Welby's friends tell me he's distraught, saying other senior colleagues haven't faced the same level of scrutiny, and that he's determined to stay to ensure an independent body adjudicates church abuse in future. The failure to stop Smyth's abuse goes far beyond Lambeth Palace and its current occupant. A former archbishop, multiple bishops and other senior clergymen are all criticised in the Macon Review. Few have spoken publicly. But survivors say if Justin Welby bows to pressure to quit, other church leaders should also be held to account. The Macon Review named multiple senior members of the Church of England who were aware of Smyth's decades of abuse. The previous Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, was allegedly briefed about it in 1983, but he denies knowledge of this. Bishop Joe Bailey-Wells received a briefing in 2013 detailing serious allegations against Smyth when she was the chaplain to the current Archbishop. But she failed to follow it up, calling the referrals not particularly remarkable. She responded today saying that she had confidence the allegations were being handled in a police investigation, but has regrets she didn't do more to verify. Stephen Conway, the previous Bishop of Ely, now promoted to be Bishop of Lincoln, heard allegations in 2013 and claims he reported this to the police at the time. But a police referral was never formally made. Smyth abused as many as 130 boys and young men in the UK, Zimbabwe and South Africa. Some of his victims attempted suicide. Others live with the trauma decades later. Now the Church, as it faces up to the repeated failings of its own leaders, is itself belatedly being forced to deal with the consequences.
Well, pressure is continuing to rise on the Archbishop, with news tonight that MPs are seeking to raise the issue in Parliament tomorrow. Well, in Folkestone now is Mark Stibbe, who is one of John Smyth's victims. He's a former vicar himself and is now an author. Mark Stibbe, for those not familiar with this story, just give us a sense, if you can, from your own experience and other victims, the particular nature of the sadistic abuse that John Smyth put you through.
Well, John Smyth was a predator who infiltrated my school, Winchester College, in the late 1970s into what was then called the Christian Forum, where young boys were learning about Christianity. And he manipulated and coerced, using religious language, people like myself into believing that he could be trusted as a kind of spiritual father. But his intentions were far from fatherly, because in the end it led to abuse of a physical, of a criminal and of a spiritual nature. So in my case, and in the case of many of the survivors that I'm in regular contact with, that meant going to his house just outside Winchester, heading up the garden with him to a shed that had been specially designed and soundproof for beatings. And these beatings were not six of the best, the sort of normal corporal punishment of the day. They were severe assaults. So I remember a man who used religious language to justify violence.
And, you know, we're talking 4 decades on now. Give me a sense of the lingering sense of trauma that you and other victims feel.
Well, I think the trauma stays with you, and you don't realise just how negatively and toxically it's affected the whole of your life. When I read the Macon review, that's long overdue, 4 years overdue, and I read it last week, I saw John Smyth, my abuser's handwriting, for the first time in 40 years, and the way he signed his name in letters and notes to me, all of which were very abusive and manipulative. That all came back when I saw that particular and distinctive and sinister way in which he signed off his name. And so that really triggered the trauma once again. So you think that maybe you're on top of it, and a lot of my fellow survivors have had years and years and years of counselling, and yet we're still suffering broken hearts and broken marriages and broken lives as a result of it. So it never quite really goes away.
Yeah, you never forget it. So I know that you have called for the Archbishop of Canterbury to resign. Just spell out for us now why that is.
I think that the Archbishop should resign because he didn't do the right thing. My father brought me up to believe that there's never ever anything to fear in doing the right thing. Now, Justin Welby in 2013 became aware of the full extent of Smyth's abuses of us, not just boys in the UK like myself, but boys in Africa as well, in Zimbabwe and in South Africa. And I think that he didn't do the right thing. He and the Bishop of Ely should have made sure that these abuses were properly reported to the authorities, but he admits, and this is covered off in the review, that he failed to act properly and rigorously and responsibly between 2013 and 2017 until you reported on these abuses. I don't think he did the right thing. Now, why does this matter? It matters because my fellow survivors every single day whilst this was not being dealt with was a further day of torment. And in one case, my best friend at school tried to commit suicide because of Smyth's abuses in 1982 in February. But then again at Christmas, on Christmas Day in fact, 2013, he got very close to doing the same thing again. And if this thing had been properly reported and dealt with in the middle of 2013, when the Diocese of Ely and the newly installed Archbishop of Canterbury knew the full extent of this suffering, maybe this would have been prevented. This attempt would not have had to happen. And I think there is a case to be made, a strong case to be made, and I don't know any Smyth survivor who doesn't believe that it should be made, that he should do the right thing now, which is to resign.
And I suppose what Justin Welby's friends would say is that the report, the Macon Review, criticises multiple bishops, a former archbishop, and he's taken the flak. He did an interview with me last week where he answered these questions. So if he resigns, shouldn't multiple bishops resign? Shouldn't there be a sort of complete overhaul?
I think when you interviewed the Archbishop of Canterbury last week, the comment that really upset us as survivors was when he said, "I am not going to resign for this." There was something about the way he said "for this" that almost implied to us that he was trivializing and minimalizing the extent of our sufferings. Is it not enough that we went through what we went through? So we feel that Justin Welby doesn't really fully understand what silence has meant in our case. But I think that the other bishops and senior clergy who are implicated and to whom the finger is pointed in this very forensic report, they bear a similar responsibility. Accountability in organizations is essential, and they've not been accountable. And I believe that they have believed that they don't need to be accountable. They're somehow above that and beyond that. Well, we want there to be a lasting legacy of something good from all this horror. And one of those things could be justice for the survivors, which would mean people standing down by acknowledging their responsibility.
Mark Stibbe, thank you very much for joining us. And I should point out that the Archbishop of Canterbury has apologised, and he has said that his failings shame him, shame the church. He's explained why he doesn't believe he should quit in the full interview, which we now have put out on YouTube, which you can watch. Well, earlier I spoke to Dr. Ian Paul, who's a reverend and member of the General Synod and the Archbishop's Council. He's also helped organise a petition calling for Mr Welby to resign. And I began by asking him why he thinks he should go.
Well, Kathy, yesterday morning I spent the morning at a local church, and I spent my time and my energy talking about the amazing good news we have in Jesus. That's what clergy want to do. Today I've spent all my time talking about this issue. And that illustrates the problem. It illustrates the disconnect between what's happening at the local church and the problems we've got in senior leadership. At the local level, churches are working their socks off to make sure that safeguarding is a priority, that churches are safe places. If you come to my church, you can find out immediately on the board who the safeguarding officer is. There's a phone number in the toilets. You know, we're working really hard. And Church of England churches on the ground are safe places. And then for clergy then to open their newspapers this morning or turn on the television or the radio and hear what the Macon report has said about the problems in senior leadership and the failing, in Macon's word, the failing of pastoral and personal responsibility, moral responsibility by the Archbishop, then that undermines their work, and that's what creates this loss of confidence and loss of trust. And that's what we're tapping into. And what the fascinating thing is, this is not a partisan issue. This is not about scapegoating. This is not about a token gesture. The three of us who organised the petition come from very, very different parts of the church. You couldn't find three more different people. But we have a shared commitment to say, look, at a national level, in terms of the senior culture, we must see a change here. And we're asking for Justin to resign, not as a sort of token gesture, but as the first step to seeing some really serious change in the culture of senior leadership.
When you read the Macon Review last week, what did you think about the criticism of Justin Welby? Why, in your view, has he fallen so far short?
Well, the Macon Review, I mean, first of all, it was a traumatic read anyway, because it set out in detail all the things that had happened. After having gone through it, I then went back and I searched all the mentions of Justin Welby. And then they just at every stage is a failure of process. I think there's been quite a big debate about what did Justin know before 2013, and that's debatable. I mean, he claimed to you in a previous interview that he had no knowledge before then. In fact, you challenged him about that, and Macon said actually his claims are unlikely. For me, my concern is what happened since 2013. And again, for most clergy on the ground, they would know that if they were informed, as Justin was in 2013, that there was an issue with a serious abuser, and that they hadn't properly acted until it came to light in 2017 in the investigation that you did. If we'd let something like that go for 4 years, I'm afraid any local clergyman, any local church leader, they would be out in their ear, they'd be disciplined. And so the question we're asking is, if that applies to the rest of the clergy, why doesn't it apply to others? Why doesn't it apply to Justin?
Justin Welby said to me in the full interview, which we're going to put out online today, that he wanted to stay, to see through this change in the way the church adjudicates abuse, so it'll be done by an independent body in future, he hopes. Is that some justification for him to stay?
No, because he has no credibility in doing that. If he himself has failed in the way that Macon has claimed, I don't see how anybody can claim credibility on that. And I think the voices that I've been struck by, and people do contact me, survivors and representative survivors contact me, and they're the ones who are most vociferous. They have criticised me and they've criticised members of the Archbishop's Council in the past, but they're the ones who say, we have no confidence. I mean, yesterday, one of the survivors of Smyth's abuse said, Justin promised me in 2017, after your investigation, he would meet with me. He never has. So how can someone who has no credibility with survivors actually see this through?
Multiple bishops were seriously criticised by the Macon Review, and lots of senior clergymen. Some of them were much more seriously criticised than Justin Welby. So they've got questions to answer, haven't they?
Yes, they have, and we need to follow this through. And I'm not clear now what the exact process is for following through on the recommendations of Macon, but we need to take it seriously, and we need to see a really significant culture change in the senior leadership within the church.
How much damage has been done to the Church of England by John Smyth's abuse, and then the way in which the church and senior leaders have covered it up over the years?
Well, Kathy, this is the real paradox. And the paradox is the one that I began with, in answer to your first question, which is that at the local level, safeguarding is in good hands. There's a lot of work being done. There's a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of investment. And there's this disconnect with the things that are happening at a senior level. So has it damaged the church nationally? Absolutely. Has it damaged the reputation of the church nationally? Absolutely. Does that undermine the really good ministry of local churches and local church leaders and members of congregations? Well, no, it hasn't, in the sense that that's going to carry on regardless. But it needs to be enabled to carry on, and we have to change the national approach and the national culture in order to catch up with the good work that's being done on the ground.
Dr. Paul, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.